First off the top at 5, former Major League Baseball player Chad Curtis has been found guilty on all counts.
She lives today with the fact that she sat in that chair right over there. She raised her right hand and for whatever reason, she's been pressured into saying things that are not true.
I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. The late 90s New York Yankees were the gold standard of professional sports. 4 World Series championships in 5 years. A clubhouse filled with future Hall of Famers. A culture so disciplined and focused that it became known simply as the Yankee way. Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, Jorge Posada, Andy Pettitte. These were not just great players. They were leaders who understood that winning at the highest level required more than talent. It required respect, trust, and a willingness to put the team above everything else. But in the middle of this dynasty, there was one player who made these legends feel something they rarely felt about a teammate. Pure disgust. The kind that makes you question how someone so wrong about everything could end up in the same uniform. MLB legends looked at Chad Curtis and saw exactly what the thumbnail says. He was absolute garbage. And the story of how champions turned on one of their own reveals everything about what separates real leadership from toxic control. If you are already shaking your head at where this is going, hit that hype button and show this video some love. Because the deeper we dive into this story, the more it exposes about protecting a winning culture from the people who want to destroy it. Chad Curtis joined the Yankees in 1997 as a journeyman outfielder with solid but unspectacular numbers. He was not a star. He was not a cornerstone. He was a role player brought in to provide depth and contribute to a championship run. And for a while, that seemed like enough. But Curtis had a vision of himself that did not match reality. He saw himself as a moral authority, a leader, someone who could reshape the culture of the most successful team in baseball. He positioned himself as the enforcer of values that nobody asked him to enforce. He appointed himself the clubhouse police. And from the moment he started trying to control his teammates, the resentment began to build. The Yankees clubhouse during this era operated on an invisible set of rules that every professional understood. You respected veterans. You earned your voice through performance. You let your game do the talking. Young players learned by watching, not by lecturing. Role players contributed without trying to rewrite the entire system. And above all, you trusted that the leaders in that room, the players who had already won championships and delivered in October, knew what it took to succeed. Curtis violated every single one of these unspoken rules. He challenged the leadership of Derek Jeter. He policed the music choices of teammates. He monitored hotel behavior like he was running surveillance. He offered unsolicited corrections to veteran pitchers. He questioned managerial decisions. And every time he did, he pushed another legend further away. In baseball, there is a term for someone like Curtis. They call him a clubhouse lawyer. It is one of the most hated roles a player can take on. A clubhouse lawyer is someone who gets involved in disputes that are not his business. He argues club policy. He critiques league decisions. He inserts himself into management conversations. He polices his teammates like he has been given authority that does not exist. It is not leadership. It is control. And control without respect is just arrogance dressed up as concern. Curtis embodied this role so completely that it became his defining characteristic. While Jeter and Rivera led through example, Curtis tried to lead through enforcement. While the core four built trust by respecting boundaries, Curtis violated those boundaries daily. He did not just fail to fit into the Yankee way, he tried to rewrite it. And every time he did, he made another enemy. The friction Curtis created spread across every dimension of team culture. He challenged the hierarchy by questioning Jeter's friendships and leadership style. He created cultural tension by aggressively policing clubhouse music, particularly hip-hop, in ways that teammates interpreted as racially motivated. He invaded privacy by monitoring hotel behavior and relentlessly pushing his religious beliefs on players who made it clear they were not interested. He fractured relationships between the outfield and bullpen by offering corrections to veteran pitchers who did not need advice from a reserve outfielder. And he exhausted management by constantly questioning tactical and cultural norms. Each of these dimensions built on the others, creating a cumulative atmosphere where resentment became the default emotion whenever Curtis walked into a room. To understand why Curtis's behavior was so offensive, you have to understand what the Yankees had built during this era. This was not just a collection of talented players thrown together by a big payroll. This was a carefully constructed culture that valued specific traits. Professionalism meant showing up prepared every single day. Accountability meant owning your mistakes without excuses. Respect meant understanding the hierarchy and earning your place in it. And chemistry meant trusting your teammates enough to let them be themselves without constant judgment. The core four exemplified all of these traits. Jeter never made excuses when he struck out in a big moment. Rivera never blamed his defense when a game got away. Posada never questioned the game plan publicly. Pettitte never acted like he was above the team. They led by being the best versions of themselves and trusting everyone else to do the same. Curtis did the opposite of all of this. When things went wrong, he looked for for someone to blame. When teammates made choices he did not agree with, he felt compelled to correct them. When the clubhouse culture did not match his personal values, he tried to force it to change. He operated from a place of judgment rather than trust. And in a room full of champions who had proven they knew how to win, that judgment felt like an insult. Curtis was essentially telling Hall of Fame caliber players that they were doing it wrong, that their methods, their culture, their leadership style were all inferior to his vision. And he did this as a bench player who had never made an all-star team, never won an MVP vote, never been the best player on any team he had ever been on. The psychological impact of having someone like Curtis in the clubhouse cannot be overstated. Imagine being Derek Jeter. You are 25 years old. You have already won 3 World Series championships. You have been named World Series MVP. You are the face of the most iconic franchise in sports. And every day, you have to deal with a teammate who thinks you need correction, who thinks your friendships are wrong, who thinks your leadership style is flawed, who thinks your music choices are immoral. That kind of constant judgment wears on you. It creates an environment where you cannot relax, cannot be yourself, cannot trust that your teammates have your back. And for a team trying to win championships, that environment is poison. But everything came to a head in August 1999 during a series against the Seattle Mariners. This was the moment that turned simmering frustration into permanent estrangement. The Yankees and Mariners were in the middle of a tense game when Curtis was hit by a pitch from Felix Rodriguez. Benches cleared, players rushed onto the field. It was the kind of baseball brawl that happens a few times every season. Adrenaline running high, emotions boiling over, everyone picking a side, except 2 people. Derek Jeter and Alex Rodriguez, who at the time were close personal friends, stood off to the side of the melee, calmly talking to each other. They were not throwing punches. They were not yelling. They were just 2 friends catching up while chaos unfolded around them, and Chad Curtis completely lost his mind. Curtis saw this moment of friendliness as a betrayal of competitive warfare. He confronted Jeter in the dugout in front of the entire team. Then he did it again in the clubhouse, in front of the media. He told Jeter, the World Series MVP, the cornerstone of the franchise, the player who would eventually become known as the captain, that he did not know how to play the game. That Jeter's willingness to remain friendly with an opponent during a brawl was a sign of weakness. That real competitors would never be caught dead talking to the enemy. Curtis actually stood there and lectured Derek Jeter about what it meant to be a professional baseball player. The absurdity of this moment cannot be overstated. Jeter had already delivered game-winning hits in the World Series. He had been named Rookie of the Year. He had become the emotional center of a championship team at an age when most players are still trying to establish themselves. Jeter did not need lessons in competitiveness from anyone, and certainly not from a reserve outfielder who had never made an all-star team. The confrontation was not just insulting, it was delusional. It was like a substitute teacher trying to lecture the principal on how to run the school. The power dynamic was so obviously tilted that Curtis's challenge felt less like courage and more like a complete disconnect from reality. What made this confrontation even worse was the public nature of it. Curtis did not pull Jeter aside privately to express his concerns. He did it in front of the entire team in the dugout. Then he did it again in front of the media in the clubhouse. He was not trying to help Jeter become a better player or leader. He was trying to embarrass him. He was trying to establish dominance. He was trying to prove that his vision of what a competitor should be was superior to Jeter's actual track record of winning championships. And in doing so, Curtis revealed something fundamental about his character. He cared more about being right than about being effective. He cared more about his own ego than about team success. Jeter, who was known for his legendary poise and discipline, was reportedly furious. But he did not yell. He did not engage in a shouting match. He just stopped speaking to Curtis entirely. For the rest of the season, the 2 teammates existed in the same space, but lived in different worlds. Jeter had a unique ability to cut people off who he deemed cocky or arrogant, and Curtis had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The silence was louder than any argument. It told everyone in that clubhouse exactly where Jeter stood. And in the social hierarchy of the Yankees, if Jeter was done with you, you were done. The dynasty had chosen its captain over the clubhouse lawyer, and it was not even close. Curtis tried to make Alex Rodriguez a proxy target for his frustration, treating him coldly whenever they occupied the same field. But it did not matter. The damage was done. The confrontation had exposed Curtis for what he really was. Not a leader, not a competitor with higher standards. Just an arrogant bench player who thought he knew better than champions. The irony was thick. Curtis positioned himself as someone who understood competitive fire and what it took to win. But his actions proved the opposite. He was willing to fracture team chemistry over a personal vendetta. He was willing to disrespect the team's best player to satisfy his own need for control. He was willing to make the clubhouse uncomfortable to prove a point that nobody asked him to make. The aftermath of that confrontation rippled through the entire organization. Players who had been tolerating Curtis out of professional courtesy suddenly felt free to express their true feelings. The resentment that had been building for months came pouring out. Teammates started openly avoiding him. Conversations would stop when he entered a room. The camaraderie that defined the Yankees clubhouse simply did not extend to Curtis anymore. He had become an island in the middle of a championship team, isolated isolated by his own arrogance and his refusal to understand that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. The disgust was not limited to Jeter. It spread to every corner of the roster, reaching legends who had very different personalities but shared one thing in common. They all found Curtis insufferable. Let me walk you through the players who turned on him, and we are going to count down from the ones who were annoyed to the ones who were absolutely done. Number 7. Buck Showalter. Showalter was a manager who valued discipline and hard work, but he also valued harmony above all else. He believed that cohesive teams won championships, and players who constantly created friction were liabilities, not assets. Curtis's reputation as a difficult teammate followed him everywhere he went, and Showalter made it clear that he preferred players who could fit into a system rather than try to rebuild it from the inside out. Showalter did not want enforcers who appointed themselves. He wanted professionals who understood their role. He had seen too many talented rosters fall apart because one player could not get out of his own way, and Curtis fit that pattern perfectly. Showalter valued players who made everyone around them better, not players who made everyone around them miserable. Number 6. Graeme Lloyd. Lloyd was a towering Australian reliever who had been in the game long enough to know what respect looked like and what it did not. When Curtis started offering unsolicited corrections to veteran pitchers, Lloyd and the rest of the bullpen staff were insulted. They saw it as a violation of the professional courtesy owed to players who had earned their stripes through years of performance. Curtis's behavior fractured the relationship between the outfield and the bullpen, creating tension that had no reason to exist. Lloyd did not need advice on how to pitch from someone who had never thrown a ball from the mound in a major league game. The arrogance of Curtis thinking he could improve veteran pitchers revealed just how disconnected he was from the reality of his own standing. Lloyd had pitched in big games. He had earned his spot on a championship roster, and he did not appreciate being lectured by someone who had not earned the right to do so. Number 5. Orlando Hernandez, known as El Duque. Hernandez was a Cuban hero who had defected under life-threatening circumstances and brought a specific brand of toughness and guile to the mound. Curtis's enforcer attitude did not translate well to Hernandez, and even with a language barrier between them, the tension was palpable. El Duque did not need a bench player telling him how to compete. He had survived things Curtis could not imagine. He had risked his life to escape Cuba and chase his dream of playing in the major leagues. Hernandez carried himself with a dignity earned through struggle and sacrifice. Curtis carried himself with an entitlement earned through nothing. The contrast was stark, and El Duque wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. Hernandez understood competition in a way that Curtis never would. He had competed with his freedom on the line, and some outfielder trying to tell him about warfare was laughable. Number 4. Joe Torre. Torre was one of the most patient managers in baseball history. He prided himself on his ability to handle diverse personalities and create what he called ground rules for winners that prioritized team harmony above individual ego. But even Torre had his limits. After the Jeter incident and Curtis's refusal to de-escalate or apologize, Torre famously sided with his young shortstop and signaled to the front office that Curtis was no longer a fit for the organization. Torre's philosophy was simple and clear. No individual, regardless of their utility as a bench player or their self-perceived moral standing, was more important than the harmony of the team. Curtis violated that principle repeatedly, and Torre was done. Torre had managed championship teams before. He understood that winning required more than talent. It required trust, and trust was impossible when one player spent all his energy trying to police everyone else instead of focusing on his own performance. Torre made the calculation that the Yankees would be better without Curtis than with him, and he was proven right. Number 3. Mariano Rivera. Rivera was a man of immense grace and professional restraint. He led through silence, through consistency, through being the most reliable pitcher in the most important moments of the biggest games. When Curtis attempted to lead a team meeting specifically to criticize Jeter's lack of traditional leadership during brawls, Rivera and the other veteran leaders remained noticeably silent. They did not validate Curtis. They did not support his grievances. They just sat there in silence. And in the social hierarchy of the Yankees, Rivera's silence was devastating. It was a form of disapproval that carried more weight than any argument or confrontation. By refusing to validate Curtis, Rivera sent a clear message that everyone in that room understood. Curtis was an outsider. His tactics were unwelcome, and the veteran core wanted nothing to do with him. Rivera's silence was the sound of a door closing. And once that door closed, there was no opening it again. Rivera had earned the right to lead through a decade of dominance. Curtis had earned nothing. Number 2. David Wells. Wells was a boisterous personality who rejected rigid authority and valued the clubhouse as a sanctuary for camaraderie and lightheartedness. He once pitched a perfect game and understood that winning required chemistry, not constant policing and lectures. In his autobiography, Wells did not hold back or mince words. He labeled Curtis a killjoy during the team's most successful era. Wells saw Curtis's self-appointed role as the moral police as a direct threat to the psychological well-being of a team that was supposed to be celebrating greatness. greatness, not enduring constant criticism from a bench player who thought he knew better than Hall of Famers. Wells had been around the game long enough to know that players who made winning miserable did not last, and he made sure everyone knew exactly how he felt about Chad Curtis. Wells understood that baseball was hard enough without someone making the clubhouse unbearable. The game beat you up. The travel exhausted you. The pressure weighed on you. The clubhouse was supposed to be a refuge from all of that, and Curtis turned it into another source of stress. Number 1. Derek Jeter, the captain, the face of the franchise, the player who defined what it meant to be a New York Yankee. Jeter's disgust with Curtis was the most significant because it represented the final judgment of the clubhouse's central identity. When Curtis told Jeter he did not know how to play the game, he was not just insulting a teammate, he was insulting the entire culture that the Yankees had built over years of sacrifice and success. Jeter's response was to cut Curtis off completely, and that silence spoke volumes. It told the organization, the fans, and every other player in that locker room that Curtis had crossed a line that could never be repaired. Jeter's ability to shut someone out completely when they exhibited arrogance was legendary, and Curtis became the most famous example of what happened when you challenge the wrong person at the wrong time. Jeter did not need to campaign against Curtis or turn other players against him. He just removed his approval and everyone else followed his lead. But the disgust was not just about personality clashes or hurt feelings over a single confrontation. It was also about Curtis trying to control the cultural atmosphere of the clubhouse in ways that felt deeply wrong to a diverse group of players. One of the most revealing incidents involved Royce Clayton and the team stereo. In April, while Clayton was playing hip-hop music as part of his pre-game routine, Curtis walked over and turned the stereo off. Clayton turned it back on. Curtis turned it off again. The two nearly came to blows right there in the clubhouse. This was not an isolated incident or a one-time misunderstanding. Jorge Posada later recalled that Jeter's own preference for hip-hop music rubbed Curtis the wrong way. Many players in that clubhouse interpreted Curtis's behavior as an attempt to enforce a white-centric cultural norm, and it alienated him even further from teammates who already did not trust him. Hip-hop was not just background noise for these players. It was part of their identity, part of their pre-game preparation, part of the culture they brought to the team. Curtis's attempts to police it felt like an attack on who they were as people, not just as players. The stereo incident became symbolic of everything wrong with Curtis's approach to leadership. He saw diversity as a threat rather than a strength. He saw cultural expression as something to be controlled rather than celebrated. And he failed to recognize that the Yankees dynasty was built on the contributions of players from different backgrounds, different neighborhoods, different countries. The team was stronger because it embraced that diversity, not in spite of it. Curtis wanted homogeneity. He wanted everyone to conform to his specific vision of what a professional athlete should look like, sound like, and behave like. And that vision was narrow, judgmental, and ultimately incompatible with the reality of modern baseball. The music conflict also revealed Curtis's complete inability to read the room or understand social cues. When Clayton first turned the stereo back on after Curtis turned it off, that was a signal. It was Clayton saying, without words, that Curtis did not have the authority to make that call. A socially aware person would have recognized that signal and backed off, but Curtis doubled down. He turned the stereo off again, escalating a situation that should have never started in the first place. This pattern of escalation defined Curtis's entire tenure with the Yankees. He could not let things go. He could not accept that he did not have the final word on every issue, and his need to win every small battle cost him the war. The music war was particularly revealing because it showed how Curtis fundamentally misunderstood leadership. He thought leadership meant control. He thought if he could control the music, control the conversation, control the behavior, then he would be respected as a leader. But real leadership does not work that way. Real leadership is about influence, not control. It is about inspiring people to follow you because they want to, not forcing them to comply because you demand it. Jeter influenced people by being excellent. Rivera influenced people by being reliable. Wells influenced people by being authentic. Curtis tried to force people to comply, and it backfired spectacularly. Curtis also violated one of the most sacred codes in professional baseball, the code of the road. What happens on the road stays on the road. Privacy is respected. Boundaries are honored. Players understand that they spend months away from their families, living in hotels, dealing with the grind of a 162-game season. The clubhouse and the hotel are supposed to be spaces where players can decompress, where they can be themselves without constant judgment or surveillance. But Curtis did not honor those boundaries. He would monitor teammates' hotel doors, watching who came and went, trying to catch people in behavior he deemed immoral. Chuck Knobloch and others felt surveilled, not supported. They felt fear and resentment, not trust or camaraderie. Curtis also relentlessly tried to recruit teammates to his chapel services, pushing his religious beliefs on players who had made it clear they were not interested. Jeter in particular grew cold toward Curtis's constant solicitation, viewing it as another example of someone trying to exert control where none was wanted or needed. The hotel monitoring was particularly egregious because it violated the fundamental understanding that teammates are not parents, and grown men do not need supervision or correction. Curtis turned spaces that were supposed to be sanctuaries into places of surveillance surveillance and judgment. He made teammates feel like they were being watched, evaluated, and found wanting. And that created an atmosphere of paranoia that was toxic to team chemistry. The irony of Curtis's religious proselytizing was that it had the opposite effect of what he intended. Instead of making teammates more interested in his faith, it made them resentful. Instead of seeing him as a moral guide, they saw him as a hypocrite who talked about love and acceptance but practiced judgment and control. Jeter was particularly put off by this because he valued authenticity above all else. If you were going to talk about being a good person, you had to actually be a good person. And someone who monitored hotel doors and policed music and embarrassed teammates in front of the media was not living up to the values he claimed to represent. The frequency and intensity of Curtis's cultural policing became impossible to ignore or tolerate. He turned off hip-hop music on a daily basis, creating aggression from Clayton and annoyance from Jeter. He selectively monitored hotel behavior, creating fear and resentment among players who valued their privacy. He persistently solicited teammates for Chappell, creating cold disregard and eroding any respect his religious beliefs might have otherwise earned. And then came the 1999 brawl criticism, the critical incident that led to absolute estrangement and, ultimately, the trade that removed him from the dynasty. After the 1999 World Series victory, a championship that should have been the peak of any player's career, Curtis was traded away from the Yankees. The move was widely viewed as the removal of a distraction during the height of the dynasty. The organization made a choice. They could keep a bench player who had utility on the field but created constant friction off it, or they could protect the culture that had made them champions 4 times in 5 years. They chose culture. They chose harmony. They chose the leaders who had earned respect over the enforcer who demanded it without ever doing the work. By removing Curtis from the roster, the Yankees reaffirmed a principle that defined their success. No individual was more important than the team. No self-appointed moral authority could override the collective judgment of Hall of Fame leaders who had proven themselves in the most pressure-packed moments imaginable. The disgust felt by Jeter, Rivera, Wells, and Torre was not pettiness or an inability to handle criticism. It was a protective mechanism. It was a necessary rejection of a toxic influence that threatened to undermine everything they had built together. The trade itself sent a powerful message to the rest of the league and to future Yankees players. The organization was willing to sacrifice talent for culture. They were willing to move a player who had contributed to championship runs if that player was damaging the fabric of the team. And other organizations took notice. The message was clear. If you wanted to play for the Yankees, you had to fit the culture. You had to respect the hierarchy. You had to earn your voice through performance. And if you could not do those things, it did not matter how well you played or what role you filled. You would not last. The timing of the trade was also significant. The Yankees did not wait for Curtis to become completely unbearable. They did not wait for him to destroy the clubhouse completely. They saw the warning signs, recognized the threat, and acted decisively. This is what great organizations do. They protect their culture proactively. They do not wait for problems to spiral out of control. They identify toxic influences early and remove them before the damage becomes irreparable. And in doing so, they send a message to everyone else in the organization. This is what we value. This is what we protect. This is what we will not tolerate. The contrast between Curtis and the leaders he tried to challenge could not be more stark. Derek Jeter finished his career with 14 All-Star selections, 5 World Series titles, and a first-ballot Hall of Fame induction, with 99.7% of the vote. He became a captain, a business owner, and an icon of the sport. Mariano Rivera finished his career with 13 All-Star selections, 5 World Series titles, and the first unanimous Hall of Fame induction in history. He became a humanitarian and a global ambassador for baseball. Chad Curtis finished his career with 0 All-Star selections, 2 World Series titles that he contributed minimally to, and a reputation as one of the most disliked teammates in Yankees history. He became a cautionary tale about what happens when arrogance outpaces ability and forced leadership replaces earned respect. The second-order impact of the Curtis saga was the strengthening of the Yankee culture. By removing him, the organization sent a message to every future player who walked into that clubhouse. We value harmony. We value earned leadership. We value respect for boundaries. We do not tolerate self-appointed enforcers who think they know better than champions. The dynasty did not just survive Curtis. It thrived without him. The Yankees went on to win another World Series in 2000, further cementing their place as one of the greatest teams in baseball history. And they did it without the distraction, without the friction, without the constant need to manage someone who could not manage himself. The 2000 championship was particularly satisfying because it proved that the Yankees had made the right decision. Curtis was gone, the culture was intact, and the winning continued. The team did not miss him on the field. They certainly did not miss him in the clubhouse. If anything, they played better without him because they could finally relax and be themselves without worrying about being judged or monitored or corrected. The chemistry improved. The trust deepened, and the results spoke for themselves. The failure of Chad Curtis is a textbook example of what happens when someone tries to lead through force rather than earn leadership through respect and performance. Curtis believed that leadership was an act of enforcement, that if he policed enough behavior, controlled enough music, monitored enough hotel rooms, and challenged enough friendships, people would eventually see him as a moral authority and follow his lead. But the legends of the 1990s Yankees understood something Curtis never grasped. True leadership is earned through performance, through consistency, through respecting the individual boundaries of the people you work with. Jeter did not need to tell people he was a leader. He showed it every October when the games mattered most. Rivera did not need to lecture anyone about discipline or dedication. He demonstrated it every time he entered a game in the ninth inning with everything on the line. Wells did not need to enforce fun or camaraderie. He created it by being himself and trusting his teammates to be themselves. Torre did not need to micromanage morality or personal behavior. He set ground rules and let professionals be professionals. Curtis tried to shortcut this entire process. He tried to take authority he had not earned and impose it on people who had already proven themselves at the highest level of the sport. And the result was not respect or admiration. It was disgust. It was rejection. It was exile. The lesson here is universal. You cannot force people to follow you. You cannot demand respect. You cannot police your way to leadership. You have to earn it through consistent excellence, through treating people with dignity, through respecting boundaries, and through proving that you care more about the collective success than your own ego. This is the lesson that transcends baseball and applies to any high-performing organization, whether it is a sports team, a business, or a community. Forced leadership will always fail. People do not follow because they are policed or controlled. They follow because they are inspired. They follow because they see someone consistently doing the work, making the sacrifices and earning the right to lead through actions rather than lectures. Curtis wanted to be a leader, but he never did the work. He never earned the respect. He never understood that leadership is not about control. It is about trust. And trust is built through actions, not through constant criticism and surveillance. The Yankees of the late 90s understood this at a cellular level. They built a culture where leaders emerged naturally through performance and consistency, where respect was mutual, where boundaries were sacred. And when someone violated that culture, they did not hesitate to remove him. It was not cruelty. It was protection. It was the recognition that the harmony of the team was more valuable than the contributions of any individual, especially an individual who brought chaos instead of cohesion. The revulsion directed toward Chad Curtis was not bullying or a lack of tolerance for different perspectives. It was a collective recognition by some of the greatest minds in the sport that Curtis was performative, arrogant, and ultimately destructive. His actions on the field were completely overshadowed by his behavior off it. The legends who felt disgusted by Curtis were not overreacting or being petty. They were seeing clearly. They were protecting something precious, and they were proving that sometimes the best thing you can do for a team is to recognize the poison and remove it before it spreads and destroys everything you have built. The Yankees dynasty of the late 90s remains one of the most celebrated eras in baseball history. 4 championships in 5 years, a roster filled with Hall of Famers and future legends, a culture defined by excellence and professionalism. And part of the reason that culture endured and thrived was because leaders like Jeter, Rivera, Wells, and Torre refused to let someone like Curtis redefine it or tear it down. They stood their ground, they protected their values, and they showed the world that true leadership is not about who talks the loudest or who enforces the most rules or who positions themselves as the moral authority. It is about who shows up when it matters, who respects the people around them, and who earns the right to lead through consistency and character. Chad Curtis tried to be a leader, but he failed in every way that mattered. He failed to earn respect from the people who mattered most. He failed to build trust with teammates who were willing to give it to those who deserved it. He failed to understand the culture he walked into and the values it represented, and he failed to recognize that leadership is given, not taken. The disgust he inspired was deserved, the exile he experienced was necessary, and the lesson his story teaches is timeless. Real leaders earn their place through excellence, humility, and respect. Fake leaders demand their place through control, judgment, and arrogance. And champions always know the difference. If this story taught you something about what real leadership looks like and what happens when someone tries to force it without earning it, hit that like button, drop a comment about the greatest leader you have ever seen in sports, and subscribe to Baseball Icons because we're going to keep bringing you the stories that matter, the lessons that last, and the truth about what it takes to build something great and protect it from those who would destroy it. The Yankees did not just win championships during that era. They protected a culture that valued respect, trust, and earned leadership. And that is a legacy worth celebrating and learning from.